Blood was urgently needed, but the real shock hit when the CEO saw who was in labor, his ex, with twins that mirrored his soul. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Rachel Collins gently caressed her 5-month pregnant belly as she arranged the small dinner table in the cramped Bronx apartment she shared with Michael Thompson. The tablecloth, though faded from too many washes, was the nicest one she owned, a gift from her mother before she'd left Maine. She placed the mismatched plates carefully, adjusting the silverware until everything aligned perfectly. At 26, Rachel had put her biochemistry master's program at Columbia University on indefinite hold. 2 years into the program, Michael had convinced her that supporting his burgeoning Wall Street career would be more practical than accumulating student debt. "Once I make it," he'd promised, "you can go back and finish with no loans hanging over your head." She glanced at the clock. 7:15. Michael would be home soon, hopefully in a good mood. The promotion he'd been angling for at Goldman Sachs had been decided this week. Tonight, regardless of that outcome, she had her own news to share. Rachel caught her reflection in the small mirror by the entryway. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once lustrous brown hair hung limply in a practical ponytail. She attempted to pinch some color into her pale cheeks. The pregnancy had been difficult. Persistent morning sickness, extreme fatigue, and last week's startling revelation at her doctor's appointment. "Twins," she whispered, placing both hands on her belly. "We're having twins." A key rattled in the lock. Rachel straightened, forcing brightness into her expression. Michael entered, immediately loosening his navy Brooks Brothers tie with an irritated tug. "How was your day?" she asked, moving to take his briefcase. Michael barely glanced at her, his eyes scanning the apartment with the same dissatisfied expression he'd worn increasingly over the past months. "Fine," he said shortly, heading straight to the liquor cabinet and pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey. "Peterson kept me late reviewing portfolio projections." Rachel noticed the crisp line of his haircut, the expensive shine of his shoes. Michael always looked impeccable, a stark contrast to their increasingly shabby apartment. "I made your favorite," she said, gesturing toward the stove where beef stroganoff simmered. "And I've got something important to tell you." Michael took a long swallow of whiskey, then finally looked at her properly. "I've got news, too." His expression shifted subtly, a glimpse of the charm that had once swept her off her feet. "I got it, Rachel. Junior analyst. Peterson announced it this afternoon." "Michael, that's wonderful." Her smile was genuine now. "I'm so proud of you. All your hard work—" "This is just the beginning," he interrupted, energy animating his features. "Junior analyst is the first real step. Peterson himself said I've got potential to rise quickly. I've been invited to the Highland Country Club next weekend. Not just the office event, but a private gathering at Jeffrey Michaels' table." Rachel recognized the name, a senior partner frequently mentioned in Michael's ambition-fueled monologues. "That's incredible," she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "And actually, perfect timing for my news." She guided him to the table where she'd already served their plates. Michael sat, still buzzing with his triumph, barely noticing how she'd prepared the table. Rachel took a deep breath. "Michael, I had my doctor's appointment last week. Everything's fine, but there's something unexpected." She reached for his hand across the table. "We're having twins!" The transformation in Michael's face was instantaneous and devastating. The excited gleam vanished, replaced by something cold that sent a chill through Rachel's body. He pulled his hand away. "Twins?" His voice was flat. "You're joking." "No, the ultrasound clearly showed 2 babies. The doctor says they appear healthy, but—" "2 babies?" Michael's words cut through hers like a blade. He stood abruptly, leaving his dinner untouched. 2 fucking babies. Rachel remained seated, her throat tightening. "I know it's a surprise, but—" "A surprise?" Michael laughed, a harsh sound she'd never heard from him before. I just got promoted to junior analyst at Goldman Sachs. Do you understand what that means? It's the first real step to becoming someone important. Rachel tried to reach for his hand again. We can do this together, Michael. I know we didn't plan for twins, but there is no we in this equation, Rachel. He stepped away, moving to the drawer where he kept his documents. I've always known you were a transitional relationship, someone to split the rent with while I build my career. The words hit Rachel like physical blows. Transitional? We've been together for 3 years. Her voice trembled. You asked me to put my studies on hold so you could focus on your career. Michael's laugh cut deeper this time. And you were naive enough to accept. Look at yourself, Rachel. Hair always a mess, no family connections, daughter of high school teachers from Maine. His gaze swept over her dismissively. You were never going to be enough for someone like me. As he spoke, he pulled out his checkbook. I'll be generous. This should cover a discreet clinic and a month's rent until you figure out where to go. The check landed on the table like a sentence. $5,000. Rachel stared at it, nausea rising as his meaning became clear. I don't want your money, she said, voice barely audible. I want you to be a father to your children. Children? Michael shook his head. They're a mistake, Rachel. A burden that would destroy my career before it even begins. Jeffrey Michaels just invited me to the country club next weekend. Do you understand what that means? People like him don't associate with single fathers from the Bronx. Rachel sank to her knees, not in supplication, but because her legs could no longer bear the weight of this betrayal. How can you say that? They're your children. No, they're cells multiplying inside you, a problem you created and need to solve. He retrieved a suitcase from behind the sofa. Rachel realized with sudden clarity that he'd planned to leave for days. I've always been clear about my priorities. Clear? She choked out. When was this clear? When you said you loved me? When you asked me to move in? When we talked about the future? Michael straightened his already perfect tie. I said what was necessary at the time. That's how the world works, Rachel. I thought someone as smart as you would understand that. At the door, he turned one last time. Don't try to contact me, Rachel. I'll be blocking your number. If you attempt any kind of extortion with child support claims, I have friends in law school who would love to practice with a pro bono case. The door closed behind him with devastating finality. For 3 hours, Rachel remained on the floor, her mind unable to process the collapse of her entire world. The stroganoff congealed on the plates. The check lay untouched on the table. It was the landlord's knock that finally roused her. Loud, insistent pounding. Rent's 2 weeks late, Miss Collins, Mr. Diaz said when she opened the door. Mr. Thompson said you'd have it today. He left a check, Rachel said numbly, retrieving it from the table. Mr. Diaz examined it, then frowned. This is made out to you, not me. And the memo says medical procedure. I'll cash it tomorrow and pay you, Rachel promised. The landlord's expression softened slightly. Look, I know you're in a delicate condition, but business is business. Thompson already called to say he's moving out. Since your name's not on the lease, you've got 30 days to vacate. After he left, Rachel called the bank to verify the check. I'm sorry, ma'am, the customer service representative said, but that account shows a stop payment order placed 45 minutes ago. Rachel stood motionless in the kitchen, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the phone. The babies moved within her, oblivious to how completely their lives had just changed. Opening her wallet, she counted her remaining cash, $17. Her bank account held $200, her last freelance tutoring payment. She hadn't worked since morning sickness became debilitating in her 3rd month. That night, Rachel slept in a women's shelter 3 miles away. The staff were kind but overworked, the beds narrow and uncomfortable. As she lay awake, one hand protectively over her belly, she made a silent vow to the tiny lives within her. You'll never need him, she whispered. I'll build something so extraordinary that when he looks back, he'll drown in his own regret. In the following weeks, Rachel moved between Boston and Providence, sleeping in bus stations and temporary shelters. Each door closed in her face when she mentioned being pregnant with twins. Employment opportunities vanished when potential employers noticed her condition. On a freezing December dawn, sitting in a public hospital waiting room in Boston after a premature contraction scare, Rachel watched nurses rush past, oblivious to her terror. The twins were active that morning, as if protesting the stress their mother endured. "I promise you'll have everything you need," she whispered to them. "We don't need his money. We don't need his name. We just need each other." That same morning, on a community bulletin board in the hospital lobby, Rachel spotted a job advertisement for a receptionist position at a small pharmaceutical company called Nordic Life Laboratories. The posting mentioned immediate health insurance coverage and the possibility of flexible hours. Hours later, still in the same clothes she'd worn for 3 days, Rachel sat across from a middle-aged woman named Helen Roberts, Nordic Life's office manager. "Your resume is quite impressive," Helen said, studying the document Rachel had hastily updated at the public library. "Almost too qualified for a receptionist position. You were in Columbia's biochemistry master's program?" "Yes, but I had to take a break," Rachel said, fighting to maintain eye contact rather than stare at her own worn shoes. "Personal circumstances changed." Helen glanced at Rachel's stomach, then back to her face. "We're looking for a receptionist, but interestingly, we also need someone for part-time lab assistance. Would you consider a hybrid position?" 3 months later, Ethan and Sophia Collins were born healthy despite being 5 weeks premature. Rachel worked days as a receptionist and nights as a lab assistant, bringing the twins with her in a second-hand stroller. When they were 6 months old, she had developed a more efficient method for synthesizing an antiviral compound that saved 23% of the reagents. "This is brilliant, Rachel," Dr. Anderson, the lead researcher, said one evening as he reviewed her process modifications. "You should go back to your studies." "I don't have time or money for university now," she replied, rocking Sophia while Ethan slept in the makeshift playpen she'd fashioned in the laboratory corner. "What if you could study right here?" Dr. Anderson suggested, eyes bright with possibility. "We could establish an internal training program. The company would save thousands with your method. It's the least we could do." On the night the twins turned 1 year old, Rachel sat at the small table in her 1-bedroom apartment. The babies slept peacefully in their shared crib, unaware of the significance of the day. Rachel opened her journal and wrote, "Michael told me I wasn't enough. He was right. I'm not enough. I am far more than he ever imagined." While she wrote those words in her modest apartment, Rachel Collins had no idea that 15 years later she would be worth billions, with her abandoned twins thriving as prodigies, while the man who had discarded them would watch in stunned recognition as his past mistakes paraded before him in triumphant glory. The thin blanket provided little comfort against the icy draft seeping through the bus terminal windows. Rachel Collins curled protectively around her growing belly, her back pressed against the hard plastic seat. Outside, Boston's early December snow fell in thick flakes, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of South Station. It was 3 in the morning, and she had exactly $47 left to her name. 6 weeks had passed since Michael had walked out of their apartment and her life. 6 weeks of homelessness, rejection, and growing desperation. Rachel had first tried staying in New York, but her meager savings evaporated quickly in the expensive city. With no family to turn to, her parents had died in a car accident during her sophomore year of college. She'd begun moving between Boston and Providence, wherever she could find temporary shelter. "Last call for Providence," announced a tired voice over the intercom. Rachel gathered her single backpack, containing everything she still owned: 2 changes of clothes, a dog-eared biochemistry textbook she couldn't bear to part with, her parents' wedding photo, and a small notebook where she tracked potential jobs and housing leads. The bus to Providence was nearly empty. Rachel claimed a double seat for herself, grateful for the warmth of the heating system as the vehicle pulled away from the terminal. She closed her eyes, not to sleep. Sleep rarely came easily now. but to rest and plan her next move. "You holding up okay, honey?" The bus driver, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, glanced at Rachel in the rearview mirror. "Not many folks on the 3 a.m. route, especially not in your condition." Rachel managed a small smile. "I'm fine. Just job hunting." The driver nodded, asking no further questions. People in transit had their reasons. By morning, Rachel was walking the streets of Providence, her backpack feeling heavier with each step. The twins were active today, their movements a reminder of the ticking clock. She estimated she was nearing 24 weeks pregnant, the point her doctor had described as viability. The thought provided small comfort as she approached another low-budget motel. "$60 a night," said the bored desk clerk, barely looking up from his magazine. "$70 with breakfast." "Do you have weekly rates?" Rachel asked, knowing the answer before he shook his head. "Week's the same as 7 nights, no discounts." $420, nearly 10 times what she had left. Rachel thanked him and left, heading toward the address of a women's shelter she'd found online at the public library the previous day. The Providence Women's Sanctuary was housed in a former church, its stone facade weathered but solid. Inside, Rachel found herself in a large room with cots lined against the walls. A harried-looking woman with kind eyes approached her. "First time here?" she asked, taking in Rachel's pregnant state with a practiced glance. "Yes," Rachel admitted. "I need a place to stay while I look for work." The woman, Martha, according to her name tag, sighed. "We're technically at capacity, but I can't turn away someone in your condition. How far along are you?" "About 24 weeks, with twins." Martha's expression shifted subtly. "Twins? That complicates things. We can offer emergency shelter for 3 nights, but our program isn't equipped for high-risk pregnancies. Have you contacted state services?" "I've been trying," Rachel said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The waiting lists are months long. 3 nights, 72 hours of sanctuary before she'd have to move again." Rachel accepted the offer with quiet gratitude. That afternoon, seated at a communal computer in the shelter, Rachel methodically applied for every job listing she could find. Retail positions, administrative work, even cleaning services. Anything that might provide enough income for a tiny apartment before the twins arrived. Each application required her to explain her current address situation, her lack of recent references, and inevitably, her pregnancy. By evening, her eyes burned from staring at the screen, and her back ached fiercely. Martha approached with a cup of herbal tea. "Any luck?" she asked, nodding toward the computer. "Not yet," Rachel admitted. "Most places stop reading my application when I mention being pregnant with twins." Martha sat beside her. "It's tough, no doubt about it. But there's a maternal housing program in Boston that might have space. They prioritize high-risk pregnancies." Hope flickered briefly in Rachel's chest. "Do you have their information?" The next morning, Rachel boarded another bus, this time back to Boston. The maternal housing program was located near Massachusetts General Hospital, a strategic placement for expectant mothers needing frequent medical care. With Martha's referral in hand, Rachel approached the intake desk with cautious optimism. "I'm sorry, Ms. Collins," said the program coordinator after reviewing her application. "We prioritize cases where there's documented domestic violence or substance recovery. Your situation, while difficult, doesn't meet our current criteria." "I'm homeless and pregnant with twins," Rachel stated flatly. "What more criteria should there be?" The coordinator's expression softened with genuine regret. "We have 8 beds and 60 applicants. The system is broken, I know that better than most. The best I can offer is to add you to our waiting list and direct you to the emergency shelter on Tremont." Rachel had already stayed at the Tremont shelter twice. They allowed a maximum of 2 nights per month to manage overcrowding. "Thank you for your time," she said, gathering her backpack and what remained of her dignity. Outside, the December wind cut through her inadequate coat. Rachel found herself walking toward Massachusetts General Hospital, drawn by the promise of warmth and clean bathrooms. In the lobby, she sank into a chair, allowing herself 5 minutes of rest before she would need to move again to avoid security's attention. The first contraction caught her by surprise, a sharp, insistent pain that momentarily took her breath away. Rachel froze, one hand pressed against her belly. Twins often came early. She knew that much from her frantic research at public libraries. But 24 weeks was dangerously premature. When the second contraction hit 3 minutes later, Rachel approached the emergency room desk. "I'm having contractions," she said to the triage nurse. "I'm pregnant with twins, about 24 weeks." The next hour passed in a blur of medical questions, examinations, and concerned faces. "Braxton Hicks contractions," explained the obstetrician eventually. "False labor, but given your circumstances, we'd like to monitor you for a few hours." Those few hours in a hospital bed were the first time Rachel had lain comfortably in weeks. The clean sheets, the steady warmth, the absence of fear. She fought against tears at these simple luxuries. "Your blood pressure is concerning," the doctor noted during a follow-up examination. "Are you under significant stress?" Rachel nearly laughed at the absurdity of the question. "You could say that. You need rest, proper nutrition, and prenatal care," the doctor continued, reviewing her chart. "Do you have insurance?" "No." "A stable living situation?" "Not currently." The doctor's pen paused. "Family support? The father of the twins?" "There's no one," Rachel said firmly. "It's just me." By dawn, the contractions had subsided. The doctor discharged her with pamphlets about state insurance programs and nutritional guidelines for multiple pregnancies. In the harsh morning light, these papers felt like cruelty disguised as help. What good were nutrition guidelines when she could barely afford to eat? Exhausted but temporarily relieved of immediate medical concerns, Rachel found herself in the hospital lobby again. Her gaze wandered to a community bulletin board covered with flyers and announcements. One notice, printed on pale blue paper, caught her attention. "Receptionist needed. Nordic Life Laboratories. Immediate health insurance. Flexible schedule possible. No experience necessary." The address listed was less than 2 miles away. Rachel carefully copied the information into her notebook, a tendril of hope unfurling in her chest for the first time in weeks. In a bathroom at the hospital, Rachel did her best to make herself presentable. She washed her face and hands, combed her hair with her fingers, and straightened her wrinkled clothes. The face that stared back at her from the mirror was gaunt and tired, dark circles shadowing once bright eyes. Still, she straightened her shoulders and practiced a professional smile. "You can do this," she told her reflection. For them. The headquarters of Nordic Life Laboratories occupied a modest building in Cambridge. Rachel approached the front desk with practiced confidence, mentally rehearsing what she would say, how she would explain her situation without revealing too much of her desperation. "I'm here about the receptionist position," she told the security guard. "Who should I ask for?" Minutes later, she was seated across from Helen Roberts, the office manager. Helen was a woman in her mid-50s with practical clothes and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Your resume is quite impressive," Helen remarked, studying the document Rachel had hastily updated at the public library yesterday. Columbia University, Biochemistry Master's Program, almost too qualified for a receptionist position. "I had to take a break from my studies," Rachel explained carefully. "Personal circumstances changed." Helen's gaze flicked briefly to Rachel's pregnant belly, then back to her face. If she had judgments, she kept them to herself. "The position involves answering phones, scheduling, filing, basic office management," Helen explained. "But I notice you have laboratory experience from your undergraduate work." "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "I worked as a research assistant for 2 years at Columbia." Helen tapped her pen thoughtfully against the desk. "We're looking for a receptionist, but interestingly, we also need someone for part-time lab assistance. Would you consider a hybrid position? Reception work during business hours and some basic lab support in the evenings? The pay would be better, and it would include immediate health insurance coverage." Rachel struggled to maintain her professional composure, to not reveal how desperately she needed this opportunity. "That sounds perfect," she said, her voice steady despite the hope threatening to overwhelm her. "When would you like me to start?" "How's tomorrow?" Helen asked with a small smile. "The lab coat might need to be special ordered, though," she added with another glance at Rachel's belly. 3 months later, Ethan and Sophia Collins were born healthy despite arriving 5 weeks early. Rachel worked during the day as a receptionist and in the evenings as a lab assistant, bringing the twins with her in a second-hand stroller. She arranged their feeding and nap schedules around her work responsibilities, finding quiet corners of the laboratory where they could sleep while she focused on her tasks. When the twins reached 6 months of age, Rachel had developed a more efficient method for synthesizing an antiviral compound that saved 23% of the reagents. The innovation caught the attention of Dr. James Anderson, Nordic Life's lead researcher. "This is brilliant, Rachel," Dr. Anderson said one evening as he reviewed her process modifications. "Your background in biochemistry is wasted on receptionist duties. You should go back to your studies." Rachel glanced at the twins, sleeping peacefully in their makeshift playpen. "I don't have time or money for university now," she replied, adjusting Sophia's blanket. Dr. Anderson studied her for a long moment. "What if you could study right here? We could establish an internal training program. The company would save thousands with your method. It's the least we could do." While Rachel discussed this possibility with Dr. Anderson, she could never have predicted that in just 7 years, she would be purchasing the very Nordic Life Laboratories, transforming it into the foundation of the empire she would build. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room had become oddly comforting to Rachel. After 36 hours of labor, she lay exhausted but alert, her eyes fixed on the 2 clear bassinets positioned beside her bed. Inside each, a tiny figure breathed steadily, wired to monitors that beeped in reassuring rhythm. 5 pounds, 2 ounces and 5 pounds even, the nurse said, checking the twins' charts. "Excellent weights for 35-weekers, especially with twins." Rachel nodded, too overwhelmed for words. The pregnancy had been difficult, with 3 hospital admissions for preterm labor before the twins finally arrived. Her body felt hollow and foreign now, the absence of their movements inside her creating a strange emptiness. "Would you like to hold them again before I take them back to the NICU?" the nurse asked. "Please," Rachel whispered. The nurse carefully lifted Ethan first, a bundle of blue blanket and downy dark hair, placing him in Rachel's left arm. Then came Sophia, slightly smaller, wrapped in pink, her tiny brow furrowed in concentration even in sleep. Rachel cradled them both, marveling at their perfect fingers, their miniature noses, the undeniable strength in their grips when they wrapped their hands around her fingers. "Hello, my loves," she murmured, her voice breaking. "It's just us now, but we're going to be magnificent." No visitors came to the hospital room, no proud grandparents, no flowers from friends, no father pacing the waiting room, just Rachel and her twins and the kind but professional attention of the hospital staff. 3 days later, a social worker stopped by to check on her. "Do you have support at home?" the woman asked, eyeing Rachel's single bag of belongings. "Yes," Rachel lied. "Friends are helping." The lie was necessary. She couldn't risk any complications with taking her babies home. The tiny apartment she'd managed to secure with her Nordic Life salary was barely furnished. A second-hand crib, a futon, a small table with 2 chairs. But it was clean, warm, and most importantly, it was theirs. On the 5th day, Rachel strapped the twins into their car seat, a donation from the hospital's community program, and took a taxi to their new home. The driver helped her carry the car seat up 3 flights of stairs, looking concerned at her pale face and careful movements. "First babies?" he asked kindly. "Yes," Rachel said, managing a tired smile. "My wife and I have 4, he said, setting down the car seat gently in her living room. "It gets easier. Not soon, but eventually." After he left, Rachel stood in the center of the small apartment, the twins sleeping peacefully in their carrier. The enormity of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was solely responsible for these two tiny lives. No family, no partner, no safety net. "We can do this," she told the sleeping babies. "We will do this." The first weeks passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. Rachel developed a system, tracking every feeding and nap in a notebook, maximizing the twins' overlapping sleep times to shower or eat or simply breathe. Helen had been incredibly supportive, allowing Rachel to take 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, unusually generous for her position. When the time came to return to work, Rachel faced her greatest logistical challenge yet. Childcare for twins would cost more than her entire salary. After exploring every option, she made a bold decision. She would bring the twins with her. "I can arrange their schedule around my work," she explained to Helen. "They sleep most of the time, and I'll keep them in the back office during front desk hours." Helen looked skeptical but not unsympathetic. "And in the evenings? The lab isn't exactly baby-friendly, Rachel." "I've thought about that," Rachel said, producing a detailed plan. "I've researched safe distances from chemicals, ventilation requirements, and created a contained area where they can be secure while I work. Dr. Anderson has already approved it, provisionally." Helen studied the meticulous plan, then looked at the determination in Rachel's eyes. "Let's try it for 2 weeks," she conceded. "But at the first sign of any risk to the babies or the research, we'll need to reconsider." That arrangement began what Rachel would later call her double-shift life. Days at the reception desk, twins napping in a playpen behind her, nights in the lab with the babies sleeping in a carefully constructed enclosure in the corner, well away from any chemicals or equipment. She became expert at typing with one hand while holding a bottle with the other, at soothing a fussy baby while answering phones, at conducting precise measurements between feedings. The twins adapted remarkably well to their unusual environment. By 6 months, they were familiar fixtures at Nordic Life. Researchers would peek into their playpen during coffee breaks, administrative staff would volunteer to hold them during meetings, and Dr. Anderson became something of a surrogate grandfather, always bringing small toys or books when he returned from conferences. It was during one such evening shift, with the twins sleeping peacefully in their corner of the lab, that Rachel had her breakthrough. She'd been assigned to synthesize batches of an antiviral compound for testing, following the standard protocol. But something about the process troubled her scientific mind. It seemed inefficient, wasteful of expensive reagents. "If we modified the initial reaction temperature and adjusted the catalyst ratio," she mused aloud, making calculations on a notepad, "the yield should improve significantly." Rachel spent that night researching her theory, carefully documenting each step of her proposed modification. The next evening, with Dr. Anderson's permission, she ran a small test batch using her new method. The results were unequivocal. Her process produced the same compound with 23% fewer reagents needed. "This is brilliant, Rachel," Dr. Anderson said, reviewing her detailed notes and results. "You've found a way to save us thousands per production run." He studied her thoughtfully. "Your background in biochemistry is wasted on receptionist duties. You should go back to your studies." Rachel glanced at the twins. Ethan was awake, quietly watching the colorful mobile above him. Sophia slept with her tiny fists clenched, a determined expression even in slumber. "I don't have time or money for university now," she replied, crossing to adjust Sophia's blanket. Dr. Anderson followed her gaze. "What if you could study right here? We could establish an internal training program. The company would save thousands with your method. It's the least we could do." Rachel turned to him, hope flickering in her eyes. "A training program? Here?" "We've done it before for promising technicians," he explained. "Not quite a formal degree, but recognized industry training that could eventually lead to certification. You'd work and study simultaneously." For the first time in months, Rachel allowed herself to imagine a future beyond day-to-day survival. A path back to the career she'd abandoned for Michael, a way to provide security for her children beyond a receptionist's salary. "I'd need to keep my schedule flexible," she said cautiously. "The twins will make it work," Dr. Anderson assured her. "Nordic Life values innovation, Rachel, and you've just proven you have that in abundance." Later that week, during her lunch break, Rachel browsed through a financial magazine someone had left in the break room. Flipping idly through the glossy pages, a familiar name caught her eye. There, in an article about rising stars in investment banking, was Michael Thompson. The photo showed him in an impeccable suit at some charity gala, his arm around a willowy blonde identified as socialite Melissa Cavendish, Thompson's fiancée. The caption read, "Goldman Sachs Michael Thompson, recently promoted to senior investment advisor with fiancée Melissa Cavendish at the Metropolitan Museum benefit." Rachel stared at the image, her sandwich forgotten. Michael looked exactly as she remembered, but somehow more polished, more confident, more entitled. His smile held the same calculated charm that had once captivated her. The woman beside him wore diamonds at her throat and wrist, her expression one of practiced elegance. Something cold and hard settled in Rachel's chest. While she had been sleeping in shelters, giving birth alone, working double shifts to survive, Michael had been attending galas, climbing corporate ladders, and proposing to socialites. The injustice of it struck her with physical force. Rachel locked herself in the bathroom, allowing 5 minutes, precisely 5 minutes, of silent tears. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the dark circles under her eyes, the utilitarian ponytail, the cheap blouse bought from a clearance rack. For one wavering moment, she felt exactly as Michael had described her, insufficient, unworthy, a mistake he had corrected by leaving. Then anger replaced despair, hardening into resolve. Rachel straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears, and spoke directly to her reflection. "He thinks he's won," she whispered. "He has no idea what's coming." That evening, after putting the twins to bed, Rachel sat at her small kitchen table with a fresh notebook. On the first page, she wrote detailed plans for her professional development through Dr. Anderson's proposed training program. On the second, financial projections and savings goals. On the third, research ideas that had been forming in her mind during her lab work. Over the following months, Rachel attacked her goals with methodical intensity. During the day, she managed reception duties while completing training modules Dr. Anderson provided. In the evenings, she conducted research, often making breakthroughs that more senior scientists had overlooked, all while caring for the twins, who grew stronger and more alert each day. When Ethan and Sophia reached their first birthday, Rachel splurged on a single cupcake with a candle. The twins, seated in their high chairs, watched with fascination as she lit the flame. Neither understood the significance, but Rachel needed to mark the milestone. 1 year, she told them, her voice steady. "We've survived 1 year on our own." After they were asleep that night, Rachel opened her journal. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Michael told me I wasn't enough. He was right. I'm not enough. I am far more than he ever imagined." While she wrote those words, Rachel had no idea that in just 7 years, she would be purchasing the very Nordic Life Laboratories, transforming it into the foundation of the empire she would build. 5 years had transformed Nordic Life Laboratories and Rachel Collins along with it. Standing before a room of attentive scientists, laser pointer in hand, Rachel guided them through complex molecular diagrams projected on the screen behind her. Her voice carried confident authority, a stark contrast to the hesitant receptionist who had once occupied the front desk. "As you can see, the modified binding site significantly improves target specificity," she explained, circling a molecular structure with her laser. "Our preliminary data suggests a 40% reduction in off-target effects compared to current market options." Dr. James Anderson, now the research director, nodded approvingly from the back row. At 62, his hair had turned completely silver, but his eyes remained sharp as he watched his protégé command the room. Rachel had long since moved from receptionist to researcher, now holding the title of Associate Research Scientist, a position typically requiring credentials she was still technically earning through their specialized training program. "Questions?" Rachel asked, concluding her presentation. A hand rose from a visiting scientist. "These results are impressive. Where did you complete your doctoral work, Dr. Collins?" A flicker of tension crossed Rachel's face, so brief most would miss it. "I'm completing specialized industry certification through Nordic Life's advanced training program," she answered smoothly. "My background includes advanced studies in biochemistry at Columbia University." If the visitor found this unusual, he didn't show it. Rachel had become adept at navigating these moments, neither apologizing for her unconventional path nor allowing anyone to diminish her contributions because of it. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Anderson approached her. "Excellent presentation. The board was particularly impressed with your cost efficiency projections." "Thank you," Rachel said, gathering her notes. "I need to run. The twins have their assessment at Brookline Academy at 2. Dr. Anderson checked his watch. "You've got time. The car service will get you there in 20 minutes. The car service, a recent perk Rachel had negotiated alongside her last promotion, had transformed her daily logistics. No more rushing to catch buses with 2 children in tow, no more arriving at appointments disheveled and breathless. In the back seat of the town car, Rachel reviewed her notes for the twins' school assessment. At 5 years old, Ethan and Sophia had already demonstrated remarkable abilities that their preschool teachers had struggled to accommodate. The Brookline Academy for Gifted Children had offered to evaluate them for potential scholarship placement, an opportunity that could open doors Rachel had only dreamed of for her children. The car pulled up to an imposing brick building with manicured grounds. Rachel straightened her navy blazer, purchased from a mid-range department store, the most expensive clothing item she'd ever owned, and checked her reflection in her compact mirror. At 31, fine lines had begun appearing around her eyes, testament to years of stress and minimal sleep. Still, there was something in her gaze now that hadn't been there before. Confidence, purpose, determination. Inside the academy's reception area, Ethan and Sophia sat quietly, already waiting with their current preschool teacher. Sophia, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, was constructing an intricate molecular model with the building blocks provided in the waiting area. Ethan, slightly taller with Michael's blue eyes, was absorbed in a book clearly intended for children many years older. "Mommy!" Sophia exclaimed, abandoning her creation to rush toward Rachel. Rachel embraced both children, inhaling the familiar scent of their shampoo. "Have you been waiting long?" "Ms. Winters showed us the science room," Ethan said, excitement breaking through his usually serious demeanor. "They have a real microscope, Mom, not a toy one." Before Rachel could respond, a tall woman in a tailored suit approached them. "Ms. Collins, I'm Dr. Eleanor Patel, Academic Director. We're ready for Ethan and Sophia now." The assessment lasted 2 hours. Rachel waited in an adjacent room, reviewing research papers on her tablet while periodically checking her phone for messages from the lab. When Dr. Patel finally returned with the twins, both children looked energized rather than drained. "Ms. Collins, could I speak with you privately?" Dr. Patel asked, while a teaching assistant offered to show the twins more of the school's facilities. In her office, Dr. Patel didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your children have remarkable capabilities. Ethan's mathematical reasoning tested at a 9-year-old level, and Sophia's spatial conceptual abilities are equally advanced. Have you considered formal IQ testing?" Rachel shook her head. "I've been focused on providing stability and enrichment at home. Their preschool mentioned they were advanced, but advanced doesn't quite capture it," Dr. Patel interjected. "They're exceptional, Ms. Collins. Brookline would be honored to offer them both full scholarships beginning next term." Full scholarships. The words hung in the air like a life raft. The academy's tuition was more than Rachel's annual salary, a fact she'd researched before allowing herself to hope. "That's incredibly generous," Rachel managed, emotion threatening to break through her professional composure. "It's not generosity, it's investment," Dr. Patel corrected, Children with their potential deserve every opportunity to develop it fully. Later that evening, Rachel balanced notebooks and tote bags while guiding the twins up the stairs to their apartment. It was larger than their first home, 2 bedrooms now instead of 1, but still modest, located in a working-class neighborhood with decent schools. The twins chattered excitedly about the academy as Rachel unlocked the door, their voices overlapping in enthusiasm. "Did you see their library, Mom? They have a chess club. Ms. Harrison said I could join the science fair even though I'm younger." Rachel set down her bags and knelt to their level, taking their small hands in hers. "I'm so proud of both of you. So incredibly proud." That night, after the twins were asleep, Rachel stood in the shower, her one reliable place of privacy, and allowed herself 5 minutes of overwhelming emotion. Tears of relief, pride, and lingering resentment mingled with the water streaming down her face. The scholarship would change everything, opening doors she had feared would remain forever closed to her children because of the circumstances of their birth, because of Michael's abandonment. 6 months later, Rachel found herself in Nordic Life's main conference room, presenting her latest research findings to the executive board. Her innovation, a method for stabilizing proteins that would otherwise degrade quickly in pharmaceutical formulations, had shown tremendous promise in initial testing. "As you can see from the stability data," Rachel explained, indicating a graph on her presentation, "our method extends viable shelf life by 43% while maintaining full therapeutic efficacy." The CEO, Martin Chambers, leaned forward. "Production costs? Initial calculations suggest a 17% increase in production cost, but this is offset by reduced waste and extended shelf life, resulting in a net 12% cost reduction over product life cycle," Rachel answered without hesitation. When the presentation concluded, Martin didn't immediately dismiss the room as usual. Instead, he exchanged glances with Dr. Anderson before addressing Rachel directly. "We'd like you to stay behind, Rachel. There's something we'd like to discuss." Once the room cleared, Martin gestured for Rachel to take a seat closer to him. "Dr. Anderson has kept me apprised of your contributions over the years. This protein stabilization method is potentially groundbreaking." Rachel nodded cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. "We're creating a new position, Head of Research and Development," Martin continued. "We'd like to offer it to you." Rachel stared at him, momentarily speechless. Head of R&D was typically a senior position requiring a PhD and decades of industry experience. "I'm honored," she began carefully, "but I should note that my formal credentials are incomplete on paper but exceptional in practice," Dr. Anderson interrupted. "The board has unanimously approved this appointment based on your demonstrated abilities, not your certificates." Martin slid a folder across the table. "This contains the formal offer, including salary and benefits details." Rachel opened the folder, and her breath caught. The proposed salary was more than triple her current earnings. "Take some time to consider it," Martin said, rising from his chair. "We'd need your answer by next week." That evening, Rachel walked through a local newsstand on her way home, a small indulgence she allowed herself once a week to browse scientific journals and occasionally treat herself to a magazine. A business publication caught her eye, or rather, a familiar face on its cover caught her eye. Michael Thompson stared back at her from the glossy page, photographed in an expensive suit against the backdrop of the New York skyline. The headline read, "Rising Star, Goldman Sachs names new VP of Investment Strategy." Rachel purchased the magazine with hands that suddenly felt cold. At home, after the twins were occupied with homework, she read the article. Michael had been promoted to Vice President of Investment Strategy, one of the youngest in the firm's history. The profile painted him as a brilliant financial mind, a ruthless negotiator, and a man with impeccable judgment. A photo inside showed him with his now wife, the former Melissa Cavendish, at some black tie event. She wore a gown that probably cost more than Rachel's rent, diamonds glittering at her throat. They looked perfect together, wealthy, polished, entitled. Rachel calculated quickly. Michael's probable bonus alone this year would exceed what she'd earned in the past 5 years combined. The disparity was staggering. He had abandoned his children, denied their existence, threatened legal action if she sought support, and the world had rewarded him handsomely for it. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made the right choices? Working endless hours, struggling to balance career and single motherhood, fighting for every opportunity while he simply coasted on privilege and connections? Then came a knock at her bedroom door. "Mom?" Ethan called. "Can you help me with my science project? I'm trying to demonstrate molecular bond angles." Rachel set the magazine aside. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be right there." In the living room, Ethan had created an elaborate construction of toothpicks and marshmallows. Sophia sat nearby, drawing what appeared to be a complex solar system with careful attention to orbital patterns. Looking at her children, brilliant, kind, curious, Rachel felt her doubt dissolve. Michael might have wealth and status, but he had sacrificed something invaluable to obtain it, something he would never recover. As Rachel helped Ethan adjust his molecular model, guiding his small hands with patience and precision, she couldn't know that in just 2 years, a financial crisis would bring Nordic Life Laboratories to its knees, creating the opportunity that would transform her from employee to owner and set her on the path to becoming the woman Michael Thompson would one day regret having abandoned. The conference room had fallen completely silent. 10 faces stared at the projected graph showing a sharp, catastrophic decline in Nordic Life's stock value. CEO Martin Chambers removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with visible exhaustion. 47% drop in 3 days, he said, his voice hollow. The FDA's rejection of NeuroShield has triggered a complete investor exodus. Rachel studied the faces around the table, senior executives whose expressions ranged from shock to resignation. NeuroShield had been Nordic Life's most promising drug candidate, the culmination of 7 years of research and nearly $80 million in development costs. The FDA's unexpected rejection citing efficacy concerns had blindsided everyone. "Our cash reserves will sustain operations for approximately 4 months, the CFO added grimly. Without a significant capital infusion or a dramatic reversal with the FDA, we're looking at layoffs beginning next month." One by one, the executives filed out of the room, shoulders slumped in defeat. Rachel remained seated, staring at the devastating projection. At 33, she had risen to head of research and development, overseeing a team of 22 scientists. The twins, now 7, were thriving at Brookline Academy. Everything she had carefully built over the past 7 years suddenly felt precarious. When everyone else had departed, Rachel approached the whiteboard and began writing chemical formulations. She worked methodically, cross-referencing data on her tablet. NeuroShield had failed because its neural regenerative properties weren't consistent enough across test subjects. But what if the compound could be repurposed? Hours passed as Rachel remained in the empty conference room. Outside the windows, dusk settled over Cambridge, lights flickering on across the city. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Reynolds, the twins' after-school caretaker. "Children have eaten dinner. Should I put them to bed if you're running late?" Rachel texted back quickly, "Yes, please. Tell them I love them and will see them at breakfast." A familiar pang of guilt twisted in her stomach. Another bedtime missed, another day where work took precedence over presence. She returned to her calculations, determination hardening her resolve. There had to be a solution hidden in the data. At 11:30, Dr. Anderson found her still working, empty coffee cups littering the table. "Rachel," he said gently, "you should go home." She looked up, blinking as if emerging from a trance. "I think I've found something, James." She turned her tablet toward him. NeuroShield's neural regenerative properties were inconsistent for neurodegenerative applications, but look at these results for vascular repair. Dr. Anderson studied the data, his expression shifting from skepticism to cautious interest. "These are compelling, but repurposing would require new trials, new approvals." "New investors," Rachel finished. But the fundamental science is sound. We wouldn't be starting from scratch. He squeezed her shoulder. Present it to Martin tomorrow. For now, go see your children. The apartment was silent when Rachel arrived home. She checked on the twins, finding them asleep in their shared bedroom. Sophia clutched her favorite chemistry book, while Ethan had fallen asleep surrounded by paper covered in complex mathematical equations. Homework they'd completed without her guidance, again. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, watching their peaceful breathing. Everything she did was for them, but sometimes she wondered if her constant work was depriving them of what they needed most, her presence. Yet without her work, how would she provide the opportunities they deserved? The next morning, after preparing breakfast and helping the twins with their backpacks, Rachel presented her findings to a skeptical Martin Chambers. Vascular applications? He frowned. That's completely outside our therapeutic focus. But potentially more lucrative, Rachel argued. Cardiovascular disease affects millions more patients than neurodegenerative conditions. The market is exponentially larger. Martin sighed. Even if you're right, the company can't survive the timeline for repurposing. We need immediate capital, or we'll have nothing left to repurpose. That afternoon, Nordic Life's board called an emergency meeting. Rachel sat in the back row as Martin delivered the grim news. Despite exploring all options, we've been unable to secure bridge financing, he announced. Given our situation, the board has voted to put Nordic Life up for sale. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the room. Rachel felt as if the floor had dropped beneath her. We've engaged Blackstone Mergers to handle the process, Martin continued. They estimate a valuation between $2 and $3 million, primarily for our intellectual property and equipment. $2 to $3 million for a company that had once been valued at $40 million. The brutal depreciation reflected their desperate position. Without operational capital, even their valuable research was worth only a fraction of its potential. After the meeting, Rachel walked slowly through the laboratory that had become her second home. She trailed her fingers along familiar equipment, remembering late nights with the twins sleeping in their playpen while she conducted experiments. This place had given her a chance when no one else would. The thought of corporate raiders dismantling it, selling off equipment and patents piecemeal, felt like watching a home burn. That evening, instead of going directly home, Rachel asked Mrs. Reynolds to keep the twins for another hour. She drove to Dr. Anderson's modest house in Arlington, finding him in his garden, pruning roses with methodical precision. "James," she said without preamble, "what if we bought Nordic Life ourselves?" He looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. "That would require millions, Rachel." "2 to 3, according to Blackstone's estimate." She sat on a garden bench. "I've been saving aggressively for 7 years. I have nearly $200,000 in investments. If you have savings, if we could get loans—" "It's madness," he interrupted, but his tone lacked conviction. "Corporate acquisitions aren't like buying a car." "I've run the numbers," Rachel persisted. "With the vascular application for NeuroShield, we could turn the company around within 18 months. We just need to bridge the gap." Dr. Anderson removed his gardening gloves, studying her with the same analytical gaze he applied to complex research problems. "I have about $300,000 in retirement savings that I could access, but that still leaves us far short." "I'll find a way," Rachel said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I always do." The following weeks became a blur of rejection and determination. Rachel approached 5 banks, presenting meticulous business plans and projections. 4 declined immediately upon seeing her limited collateral. The 5th, a smaller regional bank, showed interest but offered only half the necessary amount. Simultaneously, she approached researchers and mid-level executives at Nordic Life, proposing a cooperative buyout. Some were skeptical, others intrigued, but most were constrained by their own financial limitations. 26 days after Nordic Life was put up for sale, Rachel sat at her kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, calculating and recalculating various scenarios. The twins had gone to bed hours ago, but she could hear Ethan's soft footsteps approaching. "Mom?" His voice was tentative. "Are you okay?" Rachel looked up, forcing a smile. "Just working on a big project, sweetheart. You should be asleep." Ethan, serious beyond his 7 years, studied the papers spread across the table. "Is it about saving Nordic Life? We heard you talking to Dr. Anderson on the phone." Before Rachel could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep. "We want to help," she announced. "This isn't something for you to worry about," Rachel began, but Sophia was already disappearing back to their bedroom. She returned moments later carrying a ceramic piggy bank shaped like a molecule, Ethan's matching one tucked under her arm. "We have $73.42, Sophia declared, placing both banks on the table with solemn ceremony. "From our birthday money and chore allowances." Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's very generous, but—" "You always say that big problems need lots of small solutions added together," Ethan interrupted, his expression earnest. "This is our small solution." Looking at her children, so young yet so perceptive, Rachel made a decision. She gathered them into a tight hug, then pulled out chairs for them at the table. "You're right," she said. "And since you want to help, let me explain what we're trying to do." In simple terms, Rachel outlined the situation, how Nordic Life needed a buyer, how she and Dr. Anderson were trying to purchase it themselves, and how they were still short by nearly $1 million. "What about the other scientists?" Sophia asked. "Could they all put money together?" "That's exactly what we're trying to do," Rachel confirmed. "But many of them are worried about risking their savings." "You need to show them it's not just about money," Ethan said thoughtfully. "It's about saving something important." The next day, Rachel organized an after-hours meeting in the Nordic Life cafeteria. Nearly 30 employees attended, researchers, lab technicians, even administrative staff. Rather than presenting financial projections as she had before, Rachel took her children's advice. "Nordic Life isn't just a company," she began. "It's a mission. Every person in this room has contributed to research that will save lives. If corporate buyers acquire us, that mission becomes secondary to profit margins." She outlined her vision, an employee-owned company where scientific integrity drove decisions, where profits would be reinvested in research rather than extracted as shareholder dividends. By meeting's end, 17 employees had committed to investing their savings, totaling nearly $500,000. Combined with Rachel's savings, Dr. Anderson's contribution, and the bank loan, they were close, but still short. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helen Roberts, the office manager who had hired Rachel 7 years ago, now retired, contacted her after hearing about the buyout attempt. "I've been saving for a vacation home," Helen told her over coffee, "but at my age what I really want is to know I've been part of something meaningful. Would $300,000 help complete your funding?" 3 weeks later, Rachel sat in the offices of Blackstone Mergers, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors. Across the table sat Martin Chambers and the Nordic Life board members, their expressions a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration. "The offer from Collins Healthcare Consortium has been verified as financially viable," the Blackstone representative announced. "All funding sources have been confirmed." Rachel signed her name on document after document, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. With each signature, Nordic Life Laboratories transformed into Collins Healthcare Solutions. Outside the building afterward, Dr. Anderson embraced her. "You did the impossible, Rachel." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." That evening, Rachel gathered the employees turned investors in the company lobby. A new sign waited, covered by a cloth. With the twins at her side, she pulled the covering away, revealing the new company name in elegant silver lettering, Collins Healthcare Solutions. "Because every solution begins with people who care," she told the assembled group, her voice steady with purpose. As she placed the sign with the new company name at the entrance of the building, Rachel Collins had no idea that in just 8 years her modest $3 million acquisition would be valued at $11.8 billion, transforming her into the woman that Michael Thompson would one day deeply regret having abandoned. The first board meeting of Collins Healthcare Solutions concluded with cautious optimism. Rachel gathered her papers, watching as her fellow investor employees filed out of the conference room, their expressions a mixture of hope and trepidation. Dr. Anderson remained behind, his weathered hands resting on the polished table. "Quite a different atmosphere from last month's emergency meeting," he observed. Rachel nodded, remembering the despair that had permeated Nordic Life's final days. "We have a chance now, a real chance." "Thanks to you," Dr. Anderson said, rising slowly. "But the real work begins tomorrow." His words proved prophetic. The 5 years that followed Rachel's acquisition of Nordic Life, now Collins Healthcare Solutions, demanded more from her than she had imagined possible. The company's transformation from a struggling research outfit to a respected pharmaceutical developer required strategic vision, scientific innovation, and relentless determination. The vascular application for the renamed Neurotech compound became their first priority. Rachel assembled a dedicated team to reformulate and test the drug, often working alongside them in the lab until the early hours. The preliminary results showed promise, but investors remained skeptical, haunted by the FDA's previous rejection. "They see us as a female-led startup with recycled technology," Rachel told Dr. Anderson after a particularly frustrating meeting with potential investors. 6 men in expensive suits had listened to her presentation with thinly veiled condescension before declining to invest. "Then we'll succeed without them," Dr. Anderson replied simply. Rachel secured their first significant partnership 3 months later, a distribution agreement with a mid-sized Japanese pharmaceutical company seeking to expand their cardiovascular portfolio. The terms weren't ideal, but the contract provided crucial operating capital. The twins, now 8 years old, adapted to their mother's even more demanding schedule with remarkable resilience. Rachel converted a small storage room at the Collins Healthcare headquarters into a study area where Ethan and Sophia could work on their advanced schoolwork after classes at Brookline Academy. Ethan's mathematical abilities continued to accelerate beyond his peers. At 10, he was studying calculus concepts typically introduced to high school juniors. Sophia, equally brilliant but with different inclinations, developed a passionate interest in the social implications of medical research, devouring books on public health policy and medical ethics. "Mom, why are some medicines so expensive that people can't afford them?" Sophia asked one evening, looking up from an article about drug pricing. Rachel paused her review of quarterly reports. "That's a complicated question, sweetheart. Research and development costs billions, and companies need to recoup those investments. But what if someone needs medicine and can't pay for it? Should they just suffer?" The question lingered with Rachel, influencing decisions she would make years later when Collins Healthcare had the luxury of choosing profit margins over accessibility. By the time the twins turned 12, Collins Healthcare had grown from its original 22 scientists to a staff of over 100. Their reformulated vascular drug, now branded as CardioStem, had successfully completed Phase 2 clinical trials, demonstrating significant efficacy in promoting cardiac tissue regeneration after heart attacks. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Rachel had been conducting a video conference with international investors when her research director burst into the room. "The Phase 3 results," he said breathlessly, waving a folder. "They're better than we projected. 46% improvement in cardiac function across all patient demographics." The news transformed Collins Healthcare overnight. Pharmaceutical industry publications ran features on their miraculous comeback. Investment offers poured in, many from the same firms that had previously dismissed them. "Isn't that Harrington Capital?" Dr. Anderson asked, examining a particularly generous offer. "Didn't their representative tell you last year that women lack the risk tolerance for pharmaceutical development?" Rachel smiled thinly. "Indeed. Their offer is going directly into the shredder. Instead, she selected partners strategically, prioritizing those who respected her leadership and shared her vision for ethical drug development. Collins Healthcare expanded cautiously, opening a research facility in Copenhagen and establishing a manufacturing partnership in Singapore. Rachel's growing professional success allowed her to finally provide the stability she had always wanted for her children. They moved from their modest apartment to a comfortable townhouse in Cambridge, with separate bedrooms for the twins and a dedicated home office for Rachel. It wasn't extravagant. Rachel remained cautious with personal expenses, but it represented security unimaginable during those desperate days in shelters. At a science fair when the twins were 12, Ethan presented a sophisticated model demonstrating neural network interactions. Judges from MIT circled his booth repeatedly, incredulous that a seventh grader had produced such advanced work. "Where did you learn these concepts?" one professor asked. "My mom explained the basics," Ethan replied. "Then I researched the rest." Sophia, meanwhile, stunned her social studies teacher by submitting a 10-page analysis of inequitable access to essential medicines in developing countries, complete with statistical models projecting improved outcomes if pharmaceutical patents were modified. "This is graduate-level work," the astonished teacher told Rachel during a parent conference. "Have you considered having her IQ formally tested?" As the twins' exceptional abilities became increasingly evident, Rachel faced her greatest ongoing challenge, balancing her responsibilities as CEO with her commitment to motherhood. The growth of Collins Healthcare demanded international travel, investor meetings, and 16-hour workdays, while the twins needed guidance, presence, and stability. "I missed your science presentation," Rachel apologized to Sophia one evening, finding her daughter still awake despite the late hour. "The Tokyo investors extended the meeting and I couldn't." "It's okay, Mom," Sophia said, but the disappointment in her eyes belied her words. "Mrs. Reynolds recorded it for you." That night, Rachel sat at the edge of her bed, confronting the same question that had haunted working mothers for generations. Was she building something meaningful at the cost of what mattered most? She called the twins into her bedroom the next morning before school. "I need to have an honest conversation with you both," she began. "I'm building Collins Healthcare for our future, but I also need to be present for you now. I need your help to find the right balance." The conversation that followed revealed her children's maturity and insight. They understood her mission, perhaps better than she expected, but also articulated their need for her presence at key moments in their lives. "We're proud of what you're doing, Mom," Ethan said. "But maybe you could have dinner with us 3 nights a week, even if it's late?" Rachel restructured her schedule accordingly, implementing systems at Collins Healthcare that reduced her direct involvement in day-to-day operations. She hired executives who shared her vision but brought complementary skills, gradually building a leadership team she could trust. The creation of the Collins Foundation marked a turning point in Rachel's mission. Using profits from CardioSTEM's growing success, she established a program offering full scholarships to single mothers pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. "This foundation isn't charity," Rachel explained at the launch event. "It's investment in underutilized talent. Some of the most brilliant minds are trapped by circumstances that have nothing to do with their potential." Her words carried the weight of personal experience. The first cohort of Collins scholars included 5 women who had faced circumstances similar to Rachel's own. Talented, determined individuals whose paths had been complicated by single parenthood. When a major pharmaceutical conglomerate attempted to block CardioSTEM's approval in European markets, a transparent effort to protect their competing but less effective product, Rachel faced them with the same steely resolve that had sustained her through homelessness and abandonment. "They've underestimated us at every turn," she told her legal team. "They underestimated me when I was a homeless pregnant woman. They underestimated Collins Healthcare when we were struggling to survive. Their failure to recognize what we're capable of is their greatest weakness." The resulting legal victory not only secured CardioSTEM's European approval, but established precedents protecting smaller pharmaceutical innovators from predatory practices by industry giants. After 5 years of relentless work and strategic growth, Collins Healthcare Solutions employed over 400 people across 3 countries. Their flagship product generated annual revenues exceeding $200 million, with 3 additional promising compounds in late-stage development. It was then that Rachel allowed herself a single significant personal indulgence: a spacious apartment in Boston's prestigious Back Bay neighborhood with panoramic views of the Charles River. When the real estate agent handed her the keys, Rachel experienced a moment of dissonance, the memory of sleeping on a shelter cot colliding with the reality of purchasing a $2 million property outright. The twins explored their new home with wonder, their reactions making the expenditure worthwhile. "Mom, is this really ours?" Sophia asked, peering out at the Boston skyline from her bedroom window. "Yes," Rachel answered simply. "It's ours." Later that week, Rachel received a call from the editorial director of Forbes magazine. "We're preparing our annual feature on transformative business leaders," the woman explained. "We'd like to include you in our Women Changing Business edition. Would you be available for a photo shoot next week?" As Rachel posed for the Forbes photographer in her office at Collins Healthcare, she couldn't know that the magazine would find its way to Michael Thompson's desk at Goldman Sachs, causing him to choke on his morning coffee as he recognized the woman he had once dismissed as insufficient, now featured as the new force in pharmaceutical innovation. Rachel Collins stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Back Bay penthouse, adjusting sapphire earrings that caught the morning light streaming into the luxurious space. Boston's skyline stretched before her, the Charles River glinting like a silver ribbon winding through the city. At 41, she bore little resemblance to the desperate pregnant woman who had once slept in shelters across this same city. Her once perpetually disheveled hair now fell in a precise cut that framed her angular face, highlighting cheekbones that hunger and exhaustion had once made gaunt, but success had rendered striking. The press conference for the Pharmatech acquisition announcement is scheduled for 10 o'clock, her executive assistant recited, standing attentively near the door. The board wants a preliminary meeting at 8:30. Then we have lunch with the governor at 12:30, and finally the opening ceremony for the Collins Pediatric Wing at Massachusetts General Hospital at 6. Rachel nodded, checking her reflection in the closet mirror. Her Armani suit, tailored to perfection, replaced the bargain store clothes she'd once carefully hand-washed to preserve their limited lifespan. The woman staring back at her exuded confidence and control, qualities she had painstakingly cultivated over 15 years of relentless work. "Have the twins confirmed their attendance for the inauguration?" she asked, applying a discreet layer of lipstick. "Yes, Ms. Collins. Ethan will come directly from Harvard." His professor agreed to release him early from his advanced biochemistry class. Sophia confirmed her flight from Washington arrives at 4 after her presentation to Congress about her medicinal accessibility project. Pride warmed Rachel's chest. Ethan, accepted to Harvard at 16, had already published 2 scientific papers as first author. His research on neural regeneration had attracted attention from the most prestigious laboratories worldwide. Sophia, equally brilliant academically, had inherited Rachel's passion for the social impact of science, becoming the youngest consultant to the Congressional Health Committee at 15. The sleek company car glided through Boston's morning traffic as Rachel reviewed notes on her tablet. The journey from Nordic Life's receptionist to founder and CEO of Collins Healthcare Solutions felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. After successfully repurposing the failed NeuroShield into the groundbreaking CardioStem, Rachel had systematically expanded the company's research portfolio. The development of Neurofix 3 years ago had marked their most significant breakthrough yet, a revolutionary treatment for neurodegenerative diseases that generated $1.2 billion in annual revenue alone. Today's acquisition of Pharmatech for $2.7 billion would consolidate Collins Healthcare as the fifth largest independent pharmaceutical company in the United States. "We've arrived, Ms. Collins," her driver announced, pulling up to the gleaming headquarters of Collins Healthcare Solutions. The conference room overlooking Boston Harbor filled quickly with board members in expensive suits, their demeanor respectful as Rachel entered. Gone were the days when investors looked past her to find the real decision-maker in the room. Now they leaned forward attentively as she spoke. "The Pharmatech acquisition positions us strategically in 3 key therapeutic areas," Rachel explained, advancing through her presentation with practiced precision. "With their oncology portfolio complementing our neurology and cardiology strengths, we'll offer comprehensive solutions across the most critical disease categories." The CFO raised a hand. "The integration costs are projected at $320 million over 18 months. Are we confident about the synergy projections?" Rachel nodded. "Our due diligence team identified redundancies that can be eliminated without compromising research integrity. More importantly," she highlighted a graph showing projected growth, "Pharmatech's early-stage compounds align perfectly with our development pipeline. With the acquisition finalized, our market valuation reaches $11.8 billion, she concluded, closing the presentation. "Our 4,300 employees across 3 continents have reason to celebrate. But let's not forget that our true source of pride isn't the numbers, but the 2.3 million lives saved annually by our medicines." The press conference proceeded smoothly, with financial reporters capturing Rachel's measured responses about growth projections and integration strategies. When a journalist from Forbes approached afterward, Rachel recognized her from the profile piece published 3 years earlier. "Ms. Collins, Forbes will be announcing you as the 23rd richest self-made woman in America in our next issue," the reporter said. "Any comment on your journey from single mother to pharmaceutical magnate?" Rachel offered a practiced smile. "Success in pharmaceuticals isn't about personal wealth. It's about impact. Every treatment we develop represents thousands of lives improved or saved. That's the metric that matters." At the luncheon with Massachusetts Governor Eleanor Reeves, Rachel finalized details for a new scholarship program for single mothers in STEM fields, her way of creating pathways for women facing circumstances similar to her own 15 years earlier. 20 full scholarships annually, the governor confirmed, reviewing the document, with childcare stipends and mentorship opportunities. "This is extraordinarily generous, Rachel." "It's not generosity," Rachel replied, echoing words she had spoken when establishing the Collins Foundation. "It's investment in underutilized talent." Between meetings, Rachel checked her phone for messages from the twins. Ethan had sent a detailed analysis of a research paper he was reviewing. Sophia had forwarded talking points from her congressional presentation on pharmaceutical accessibility in developing nations. At 15, her children navigated worlds that most adults found intimidating, yet maintained the compassion and groundedness Rachel had prioritized in their upbringing. The afternoon passed in a blur of executive decisions, investor calls, and preparation for the hospital wing inauguration. At 5:30, Rachel's car pulled up to Massachusetts General Hospital, where a small crowd of media and hospital administrators had gathered near the entrance. "Mom, you look amazing!" Sophia's voice cut through the crowd as she rushed forward, embracing Rachel with enthusiasm. At 15, she was the image of Rachel, except for the square jawline unmistakably inherited from Michael. Ethan arrived moments later, carrying a thick biochemistry textbook under his arm. "Sorry I'm late. Professor Patterson wanted to discuss my research on biomarkers." Rachel embraced her children tightly. "You are the best thing I've ever done." Together, they walked toward the event for the Collins Pediatric Wing inauguration, a $50 million project Rachel had funded entirely. The hospital lobby bustled with Boston's medical and business elite, gathered to celebrate the new facility that would provide cutting-edge pediatric care regardless of patients' financial circumstances. "Nervous, Mom?" Ethan asked, noticing Rachel repeatedly adjusting her platinum bracelet. "It's not every day we see our name on a building," she replied with a smile, not revealing the true source of her unease, a strange sensation that something significant was about to happen. As they crossed the gleaming marble lobby toward the auditorium, Rachel felt an inexplicable chill race up her spine. For 15 years, she had channeled the pain of abandonment into building something extraordinary. The frightened, rejected young woman who had once wandered Boston's streets had transformed into a force of nature, reshaping an industry through sheer will and brilliant innovation. The auditorium filled quickly. Rachel sat between Ethan and Sophia in the front row, listening as the hospital director began his speech about the transformative impact the new pediatric wing would have on children's health care in New England. As he spoke, Rachel felt an odd, prickling sensation at the nape of her neck, that primitive feeling of being watched. Discreetly, she turned to scan the audience. 7 rows back, slightly older with pronounced receding hairline but unmistakable, Michael Thompson. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to freeze. Michael stared at her with an expression of absolute shock, his eyes frantically moving between her and the twins, recognizing undeniable traces of himself in them. Ethan's penetrating blue eyes, Sophia's square jawline. "Rachel Collins, would you join us on stage?" The hospital director's voice broke through the suspended moment. With studied grace, Rachel rose and walked to the stage, each step of her Louboutin heels echoing like a reminder of the distance she had traveled since being abandoned. "Dr. Collins is not only a brilliant scientist and businesswoman," the director continued, "but a philanthropist whose $50 million donation makes it possible for thousands of children to receive cutting-edge treatments regardless of their families' financial situations." Rachel adjusted the microphone. Although she had planned a speech about medical innovation and corporate responsibility, Michael's unexpected presence altered her course. "15 years ago, I slept in a homeless shelter 3 blocks from this hospital," she began, feeling the room fall completely silent. "I was pregnant with twins, had been evicted, and abandoned by the man who had sworn to love me." From the corner of her eye, she saw Michael shrink in his seat. "That cold December night, I made 2 promises: that my children would never need a man who considered them a mistake, and that I would transform that rejection into fuel to build something extraordinary." The audience was transfixed. In the front row, Ethan and Sophia exchanged confused glances. Their mother rarely spoke about their biological father. Today, Collins Healthcare Solutions employs over 4,300 people and has just completed a $2.7 billion acquisition. Our medications save more than 2 million lives annually. She paused deliberately. "And my children? Well, they're living proof that rejecting someone because you consider them insufficient may be the greatest mistake anyone will ever make." Michael appeared unable to breathe, his face alternating between pallor and flush. Beside him, a middle-aged blonde woman whispered questions he clearly couldn't answer. After the speech, during the reception, Rachel was guiding the governor through the new facility when she felt a presence behind her. "Rachel." Michael's voice sounded strangled. She turned slowly, her face a mask of professional calm. "Michael Thompson," she said, as if pronouncing the name of a distant acquaintance. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. I work for Meridian Investments. We manage part of the hospital's portfolio." His position as a middle manager hung implicitly between them, far from the Wall Street titan he had dreamed of becoming. "These are our—" He looked toward the twins who were approaching curiously. "My children," Rachel corrected firmly. "Ethan and Sophia Collins." Sophia, always perceptive, studied Michael intently. "You look familiar." Rachel intervened smoothly. "Children, this is Michael Thompson, a former acquaintance." "Former acquaintance?" Michael looked stunned. "Rachel, we need to talk privately. I never imagined you would continue with the pregnancy. Why didn't you ever contact me?" An elegant laugh escaped Rachel's lips. "Contact you? You blocked my number, threatened legal action if I asked for child support, and canceled a check that literally left me on the street. Besides," She adjusted her platinum bracelet. "You made it very clear that I would never be enough for someone like you." While she walked away, Rachel heard Michael's wife's elevated voice. "Who is she? Why do those teenagers look so much like you?" The room spun around Michael Thompson as he watched Rachel Collins, the woman he had abandoned as insignificant, command the room as its undisputed queen. The room spun around Michael Thompson as he watched Rachel Collins, the woman he had abandoned as insignificant, command the room as its undisputed queen. The shock had rendered him almost immobile, his manicured fingernails digging into his palms as he struggled to process the magnitude of what was unfolding before him. Rachel sat in the first row between two teenagers, his children, with a poise that radiated quiet power. The hospital auditorium hummed with anticipation as the director continued his speech about the revolutionary pediatric facilities the Collins donation had made possible. Yet Michael could focus on nothing but the three figures in the front row, the family he had discarded 15 years ago. Rachel's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and Michael realized she could sense his gaze. Like prey detecting a predator, she turned slightly, scanning the audience until her eyes locked with his. The moment stretched between them, charged with 15 years of unspoken history. There was no warmth in her gaze, no surprise, only a cool assessment that made Michael feel stripped bare. Her attention shifted to the teenagers beside her, then back to Michael, allowing him a clear view of them. The boy, Ethan she had called him, had Michael's eyes, the same piercing blue that had charmed investors and women alike. The girl, Sophia, had inherited his square jawline and determined expression. They were undeniably his, yet completely strangers. The realization struck him with physical force, momentarily robbing him of breath. "Rachel Collins, would you join us on stage?" The hospital director's voice cut through Michael's spiraling thoughts. With fluid grace that spoke of years of commanding boardrooms, Rachel rose from her seat. Each deliberate step of her Louboutin heels against the polished floor seemed to echo with triumph. Michael found himself cataloging the differences between this woman and the graduate student he had abandoned. Where Rachel had once been perpetually disheveled, rushing between classes and part-time jobs, this woman moved with measured confidence. Her tailored suit probably cost more than a month of his current salary. Jennifer shifted beside him, her perfume suddenly cloying. "Isn't that the pharmaceutical CEO? Collins Healthcare?" she whispered, oblivious to the personal earthquake Michael was experiencing. "They just acquired Pharmatech. It was all over the financial news this morning." Michael couldn't answer. His throat had constricted to the point of pain. "Dr. Collins is not only a brilliant scientist and businesswoman," the director continued, beaming at Rachel, "but a philanthropist whose $50 million donation makes it possible for thousands of children to receive cutting-edge treatments regardless of their families' financial situations." $50 million. The figure registered dimly in Michael's mind, a sum so vast it seemed abstract. He had always imagined himself reaching such financial heights, not the woman he had dismissed as inadequate for his ambitions. Rachel adjusted the microphone, surveying the audience with quiet authority. 15 years ago, I slept in a homeless shelter 3 blocks from this hospital," she began, her voice steady. "I was pregnant with twins, had been evicted, and abandoned by the man who had sworn to love me. The unexpected personal revelation sent a ripple through the audience. Michael sank lower in his seat, feeling exposed, as if her words had somehow illuminated him in the darkened auditorium. That cold December night, I made 2 promises: that my children would never need a man who considered them a mistake, and that I would transform that rejection into fuel to build something extraordinary." Michael's own words returned to haunt him with devastating clarity. "They're a mistake, Rachel. A burden that would destroy my career before it even begins." He had spoken those words so carelessly, so convinced of his own importance. In the front row, Ethan and Sophia exchanged puzzled glances. Michael realized with a jolt that they didn't know. They had no idea who he was or what he had done. The narrative of their lives apparently contained no space for him. Today, Collins Healthcare Solutions employs over 4,300 people and has just completed a $2.7 billion acquisition. Our medications save more than 2 million lives annually. Rachel paused, her gaze sweeping the audience before landing precisely where Michael sat. And my children? Well, they're living proof that rejecting someone because you consider them insufficient may be the greatest mistake anyone will ever make. Jennifer stiffened beside him, her head turning slowly. Michael? Her voice held a question laden with sudden suspicion. Why is she looking at you like that? He couldn't answer, couldn't find words to explain the catastrophic error in judgment that had shaped the past 15 years. Jennifer's questions continued in urgent whispers, each one increasing in volume and intensity as his silence persisted. The remainder of Rachel's speech passed in a blur. Michael sat paralyzed, watching as she received a standing ovation as she embraced her children, his children, at the edge of the stage, as they moved together through the crowd toward the reception area, a cohesive family unit that had never included him. Michael, I'm talking to you. Jennifer's voice cut through his daze. Do you know her? Those teenagers look exactly like you. What is going on? Not here, he managed finally, his voice a hoarse whisper. I'll explain later. You'll explain now. Jennifer's normally composed features had hardened into something unrecognizable. Why does that woman's daughter have your exact jawline? In the reception hall, Michael moved mechanically, nodding at acquaintances while desperately tracking Rachel's movements through the crowd. She glided from group to group, graciously accepting congratulations, introducing her children to dignitaries with evident pride. The ease with which she navigated this world of wealth and influence, a world he had once told her she could never belong to, was the final crushing irony. When Rachel stepped away from the governor to accept a glass of champagne, Michael seized his opportunity. Ignoring Jennifer's restraining hand on his arm, he moved across the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rachel. His voice sounded strange even to his own ears, strained and unfamiliar. She turned slowly, her expression transforming from warm engagement to cool professionalism. No surprise, no anger, just the measured assessment one might give to an unexpected but minor business complication. Michael Thompson, she said, pronouncing his name as if introducing a casual acquaintance. I wasn't expecting to see you here. The dismissive tone, his own weapon once used against her, now turned back on him with devastating precision. I work for Meridian Investments. We manage part of the hospital's portfolio. The words felt hollow as they left his mouth, his middle management position suddenly painfully inadequate next to her evident success. His gaze drifted past her to where the twins stood near a display about the new pediatric research facilities. Seeing them up close intensified the shock. They were unmistakably his children, yet completely formed without any input from him. Strangers who carried his DNA. These are our... He couldn't complete the sentence, the words tangling in his throat. My children, Rachel corrected firmly. Ethan and Sophia Collins. The teenagers had noticed the exchange and were approaching with curious expressions. Sophia studied Michael intently, her analytical gaze uncomfortably familiar. It was the same look he saw in the mirror when puzzling through complex financial problems. You look familiar, she said, head tilted slightly. Something like panic flared in Michael's chest. What would Rachel tell them? What did they already know? Rachel intervened smoothly. Children, this is Michael Thompson, a former acquaintance. Former acquaintance? The words burst from him before he could stop them. Rachel, we need to talk privately. I didn't know... I never imagined you would continue with the pregnancy. Why didn't you ever contact me? An elegant laugh escaped Rachel's lips. Not the nervous giggle he remembered, but something refined and controlled. Contact you? You blocked my number, threatened legal action if I asked for child support, and canceled a check that literally left me on the street. Besides, she adjusted an expensive-looking platinum bracelet. You made it very clear that I would never be enough for someone like you." Every word struck him like a physical blow, each one exposing the callousness of his past actions. The twins were watching this exchange with increasing interest, their intelligent eyes moving between Rachel and Michael as they began to process the implications. Ethan stepped forward, his posture protective. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Perfectly fine, darling. We were just reminiscing about the past." Michael stared at Ethan, confronted with a younger version of himself, except this boy stood straight-backed with confidence, his eyes showing compassion rather than calculation. The differences were as striking as the similarities. "You're the boy who was accepted to Harvard at 16, Michael murmured, suddenly remembering an article he had read. "And you," he turned to Sophia, "presented a project to Congress last week. Have you been researching my children?" Rachel's tone hardened. "No, I read about them. Their achievements are remarkable." He swallowed hard. "I have a son, Thomas, with my wife, Jennifer. He struggles in school." Jennifer appeared at his side, visibly disturbed. "Michael, what's happening? Who are these people?" The silence that followed stretched painfully until Rachel's phone chimed. She checked the screen, visibly relieved at the interruption. "I need to take this. It's the CEO of Pharmatech," she said. Then, with deliberate calm, "It was an interesting encounter, Michael. I hope your life has been as meaningful as you wished when you decided we weren't worth your time." As she walked away, Michael heard Jennifer's voice rising. "Who is she? Why do those teenagers look so much like you?" While his wife's increasingly frantic questions continued, Michael could focus only on Rachel Collins, the woman he had abandoned as insignificant, commanding the room as its undisputed queen, while the world he had carefully constructed began crumbling around him. The elegant oak door of Rachel's private office stood in stark contrast to the sterile white walls of the hospital corridor. It was nearly midnight, the inauguration ceremony having ended hours earlier. The twins had been sent home with her driver, while Rachel remained to finalize the documentation for the pediatric wing's operational protocols. She massaged her temples, the emotional toll of the evening weighing on her more heavily than the administrative tasks. The soft knocking startled her. At this hour, she expected only cleaning staff or perhaps a late-working physician. "Come in," she called, assuming it was hospital personnel. The door opened slowly to reveal Michael Thompson, his appearance markedly different from the polished financial advisor of the ceremony. His tie hung loose around his neck, hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. The crisp confidence he'd maintained even during their tense exchange earlier had evaporated, replaced by something haggard and desperate. "How did you get past security?" Rachel asked, remaining seated behind her desk. "I told them I forgot something important at the reception." Michael closed the door behind him, his movements uncharacteristically tentative. "Jennifer left, took Thomas to her mother's house after I explained everything." Rachel sighed, closing her laptop. "I'm sorry about your family, but that's not my problem." 15 years, Rachel." Michael stepped toward the chair across from her desk. 15 years without knowing I had 2 children in the world. How could you deny me that?" The calm that Rachel had maintained throughout the evening evaporated instantly. "How could I? You told me they were a mistake, a burden. You threw money at me to eliminate them. I was young and scared. I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Rachel stood, placing her palms flat on the desk. "You know what a mistake is, Michael? Miscalculating a dosage in the lab, investing in the wrong company. What you did was a conscious, cruel choice." Michael covered his face with his hands. "You're right. It was unforgivable. But now that I know, I want to meet them. They deserve to have a father." "They have a complete, loving family," Rachel responded firmly. "They don't need someone who only became interested after discovering their prodigies." "That's not it. I saw how brilliant they are, yes, but they're my blood, Rachel." "Blood?" Rachel laughed without humor. Blood is what dripped from my swollen feet while working 16 hours a day and 2 jobs during pregnancy. Blood is what I lost during premature labor because I couldn't afford proper prenatal care. Michael paled. I can make amends. I have savings, investments. Let me clarify something. Rachel leaned forward. The donation I made to this hospital today? $50 million. Do you know how long it would take you to earn that with your current salary at Meridian? Approximately 833 years, assuming you don't eat or pay taxes. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of a hospital announcement over the intercom. What do you want from me then? Michael finally asked, his voice defeated. Absolutely nothing, Rachel answered with genuine sincerity. I stopped needing or wanting anything from you a very long time ago. And the twins? Will you tell them who I am? Rachel considered for a moment. They have a right to the truth, but it's up to them to decide if they want to know you. Michael's shoulders slumped. They hate me already, don't they? They don't know enough about you to hate you, Rachel replied evenly. I never vilified you to them. I simply told them their father wasn't ready to be a parent. That was generous of you. It wasn't about generosity. It was about not allowing bitterness to poison them. Rachel stood, signaling the conversation was ending. I'll speak with them tomorrow. If they want to meet you, I'll arrange it. Michael nodded slowly, reality seemingly settling over him. They're extraordinary, Rachel. What you've done, raising them, building your company, it's remarkable. Yes, she agreed simply. It is. The next morning, Rachel gathered Ethan and Sophia in their spacious living room overlooking the Charles River. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the twins' curious expressions as they settled onto the cream-colored sofa. I need to tell you something important, Rachel began, her voice gentle but steady. About the man you met yesterday at the hospital. Sophia's perceptive eyes narrowed. He's not just a former acquaintance, is he? Rachel shook her head. No, Michael Thompson is your biological father. The words hung in the air. Ethan's posture stiffened while Sophia unconsciously touched her jawline. That's why he looked familiar, Sophia said quietly. I have his chin. And I have his eyes, Ethan added, fingers brushing his face as if rediscovering it. I always wondered where they came from since they don't match yours, Mom. Rachel took a deep breath. 15 years ago, Michael and I were in a relationship. When I told him I was pregnant with twins, he wasn't ready for that responsibility. He made it clear he didn't want to be involved. He abandoned us, Ethan stated flatly, the mathematician in him distilling the situation to its essence. Yes, Rachel confirmed. He left before you were born. Yesterday was the first time he's seen you. Why didn't you tell us before? Sophia asked, her analytical mind working through the implications. We've asked about our father over the years. I told you he wasn't ready to be a parent, which was true. I didn't share the details because I wanted you to form your own identities without the shadow of rejection. Rachel reached for their hands. I want you both to understand something important. You two are the best people I know, not despite his absence, but perhaps because of it. Our small family unit was forged in difficult circumstances, but that made us extraordinarily strong. The twins processed this information with the remarkable maturity that had always characterized them. After a moment, Ethan spoke. Does he want to meet us? Properly, I mean? Yes, but the choice is entirely yours. I won't feel any differently about you regardless of what you decide. Sophia exchanged a glance with her brother. We should think about this. Take all the time you need, Rachel assured them. There's no rush. 2 weeks later, after careful consideration and numerous family discussions, the twins decided they wanted a brief meeting with Michael. Rachel arranged for them to meet at a neutral cafe, remaining in her car across the street to give them privacy while staying close enough for support if needed. For 63 minutes, Rachel counted each one, She answered emails on her tablet while anxiety gnawed at her. When the twins finally emerged from the cafe, their expressions carried a complex mixture of emotions that only someone who had raised them could fully decode. "How was it?" she asked softly as they settled into the car. "Strange," Sophia answered, her usual eloquence temporarily abandoned. "He cried a lot." "He showed us pictures from when he was young," Ethan added, "and said he made the biggest mistake of his life." Rachel hesitated before asking the question pressing most heavily on her heart. "Do you want to see him again?" The twins exchanged another of their communicative glances. A silent conversation developed over 15 years of shared existence. "Maybe, eventually," Sophia replied, "but we're not in a hurry. Our family is already complete." Ethan nodded in agreement. "He seems desperate for connection, but that's not our responsibility to provide." "No," Rachel confirmed. "It isn't." 3 months later, Rachel encountered Michael by chance at a charity fundraiser for medical research in Boston. The event, held at the Four Seasons Hotel, brought together the city's philanthropic and business communities. Rachel was discussing potential research grants with the dean of Harvard Medical School when she spotted Michael across the room. He looked thinner, older than he had at the hospital. When their eyes met, he approached with hesitant steps. "Jennifer filed for divorce," he informed her without preamble. "And I resigned from Meridian. I'm working as an independent consultant now." Rachel nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. "The twins have been sending me emails," he continued. "Not frequent, but polite. Ethan shared a scientific paper he published." "That's good, Michael. They are extraordinary people." "Thanks to you," he acknowledged, voice thick with emotion. "You built something incredible, Rachel. Not just the company, but those 2 wonderful lives. And I lost everything." Rachel looked at the broken man before her, not with satisfaction for vengeance achieved, but with the serenity of someone finally freed from the past. "You haven't lost everything, Michael. You lost the opportunity to participate in the journey. But Ethan and Sophia are alive, brilliant, and if they choose, they may have some kind of relationship with you in the future." "And what about us?" he asked hesitantly. "Is there any possibility of forgiveness?" Rachel smiled gently. "I forgave you a long time ago, Michael. It was the only way to move forward. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting or going back." When Rachel departed that evening, she felt as if a final invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. On her phone, messages from Ethan and Sophia asked if she would make it home in time for the dinner they had prepared. Looking at the illuminated city through her limousine window, Rachel Collins felt a profound peace. There was no longer anger or bitterness, only gratitude for the path life had taken. The abandonment that should have destroyed her had become the foundation for something far greater than Michael Thompson could ever have offered her. Not just a financial empire, but a life of purpose, fulfillment, and unconditional love. The morning light filtered through the windows of Rachel's Back Bay penthouse, casting a golden glow across the living room overlooking the Charles River. Rachel had prepared herself for this conversation carefully, choosing a casual Saturday when both twins would be home without academic obligations pressing on them. She arranged 3 mugs of steaming tea on the coffee table, a ritual that had come to signify important family discussions over the years. "I've made your favorite," she said as Ethan and Sophia entered the living room. "Earl Grey for Ethan, mint for Sophia." The twins exchanged glances, that silent communication that had developed between them since before they could speak. At 15, they carried themselves with a maturity that sometimes made Rachel forget how young they still were. "This is about him, isn't it?" Sophia asked, settling into the plush armchair. "Michael Thompson." Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, it's time I told you the complete story." For the next hour, Rachel shared everything, the full, unvarnished truth about her relationship with Michael, his cruel dismissal when she announced her pregnancy, the cancelled check that left her homeless, and the desperate months that followed. She described sleeping in shelters, the premature contractions, finding the job at Nordic Life, and the years of struggle that followed. "I've always told you your father wasn't ready to be a parent," she explained. But that was simplifying a complex and painful reality. The truth is that he made a deliberate choice to reject us because he saw us as obstacles to his ambitions. The twins listened intently, their expressions shifting between shock, anger, and thoughtfulness. "So when he looked at us at the hospital," Ethan said slowly, "that was the first time he'd ever seen us?" "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "Until that moment, he had no idea what became of us. He assumed I'd terminated the pregnancy." Sophia touched her chin, the same square jawline that had immediately revealed her paternity to Michael. "That's why he stared at us like that. He was seeing himself in us." "He wants to meet with you properly," Rachel continued. "I told him the choice was entirely yours. There's no pressure either way, and I'll support whatever you decide." A heavy silence fell over the room as the twins processed everything they'd learned. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I think we should meet him," he said, looking to his sister for confirmation. "Not for him, but for us, to understand." Sophia nodded in agreement. "We have questions only he can answer." 2 weeks later, Rachel sat in her car across the street from a small cafe in Cambridge. Through the window, she could see the twins seated at a corner table with Michael. She had offered to accompany them inside, but they had insisted on doing this alone, a decision that filled her with both pride and apprehension. For over an hour, Rachel answered emails on her tablet, her attention constantly drifting to the cafe. When the twins finally emerged, she studied their faces anxiously, looking for signs of distress or disappointment. "How was it?" she asked softly as they settled into the car. "Strange," Sophia answered, her usual eloquence temporarily abandoned. "He cried a lot." "Showed us photos from when he was young," Ethan added, his expression thoughtful, "and said he made the biggest mistake of his life." Rachel hesitated, uncertain how much to probe. "Do you want to see him again?" The twins exchanged one of their communicative glances. A silent conversation developed over 15 years of shared experience. "Maybe eventually," Sophia replied after a moment. "But we're not in a hurry. Our family is already complete." Ethan nodded in agreement. "He seems desperate for connection, but that's not our responsibility to provide." "No," Rachel affirmed gently, "it isn't." In the weeks that followed, Rachel observed subtle changes in the twins. They occasionally mentioned Michael in passing. Ethan had sent him a recently published scientific paper. Sophia had answered questions about her educational plans. The connection was tentative, cordial, but maintained at a careful distance. 3 months after the hospital encounter, Rachel attended a medical research fundraiser at the Four Seasons, Boston. She was discussing potential research grants with the dean of Harvard Medical School when she spotted Michael across the room. He looked markedly different, thinner, with a certain defeated slump to his shoulders that hadn't been present before. When their eyes met, he approached with hesitant steps. "Jennifer filed for divorce," he stated without preamble, his voice flat. "She took Thomas to her mother's house. The papers came through last week." Rachel nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I resigned from Meridian too," he continued. "I'm working as an independent consultant now." The implications were clear. His perfectly orchestrated life had unraveled in the months since their encounter. The wife who had stood by his side at the hospital, the career he had prioritized above all else, both casualties of the truth he had tried to bury. "The twins have been sending me emails," Michael added, a flicker of something like hope crossing his face. "Not frequent, but polite." Ethan shared a scientific paper he published. "That's good, Michael. They are extraordinary people." "Thanks to you," he acknowledged, voice thick with emotion. "You built something incredible, Rachel. Not just the company, but those 2 wonderful lives. And I lost everything." Rachel studied the man before her, not with satisfaction for vengeance achieved, but with the serenity of someone finally freed from the past. You haven't lost everything, Michael. You lost the opportunity to participate in the journey. But Ethan and Sophia are alive, brilliant, and if they choose, they may have some kind of relationship with you in the future." Michael seemed to gather courage before asking the question that clearly weighed on him. "And what about us? Is there any possibility of forgiveness?" Rachel smiled gently. "I forgave you a long time ago, Michael. It was the only way to move forward. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting or going back." As she walked away, Rachel felt a profound sense of closure. The man who had once wielded such power over her emotional state now seemed diminished, not because she wished him ill, but because she had outgrown the pain he had caused. That evening, as her car glided through Boston's illuminated streets, Rachel checked her phone to find messages from both twins. "Coming home soon?" Ethan had written. "We're making dinner." "Hope you can make it," Sophia added. "Ethan's attempting risotto. Results unpredictable." Rachel smiled, directing her driver to head home rather than back to the office as originally planned. The past 3 months had shifted something fundamental in their family dynamic, as if the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place, not completing them, but affirming that they had been complete all along. When she arrived at the penthouse, delicious aromas filled the air. Ethan stood at the stove, stirring a creamy risotto with the same precision he applied to laboratory experiments. Sophia was arranging a salad, her artistic eye evident in the composition of colors and textures. "You're just in time," Sophia announced, looking up with a smile. "Ethan's creation is actually edible. We've tested it extensively. With rigorous scientific methodology," Ethan added seriously, though his eyes twinkled. As they sat around the dining table, sharing the meal and discussing their day, Rachel felt a peace that had eluded her for 15 years. There was no more Michael Thompson projecting a shadow over their future, only the bright light of the family they had built together. Somewhere across the city, Michael Thompson stared at an old photograph of himself at 27, ambitious, arrogant, utterly unaware of the true value of what he was rejecting. Now, at 42, he finally understood the magnitude of his loss, not just a family and an empire, but the chance to be part of something genuinely meaningful. Rachel, however, moved forward, complete, victorious, and at peace, with all the blood of her heart pulsing for what truly mattered, the brilliant future she had built with her own hands. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Rachel stood at the windows of her penthouse, looking out at the city she had once wandered homeless and desperate. The journey from that frightened pregnant woman to the CEO of a pharmaceutical empire seemed both impossibly long and surprisingly direct, a straight line drawn by determination and love. She thought briefly of Michael, wondering if he would find peace with the choices he had made. But that was his journey now, separate from hers. The intertwining of their lives had produced two remarkable human beings, but their paths had diverged permanently 15 years ago in that small Bronx apartment. Rachel touched the glass, her reflection superimposed over the glittering city lights. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the one Michael had abandoned, not just in her tailored clothes and confident posture, but in the certainty that radiated from within. She had not merely survived his rejection, she had transformed it into the foundation of a life more meaningful than he could have ever offered her. "Mom?" Sophia's voice came softly from behind her. "Can't sleep?" Rachel turned, smiling at her daughter standing in the doorway in pajamas covered with chemical formulas, a birthday gift from Ethan. "Just thinking," Rachel replied, "about how far we've come." Sophia crossed the room to stand beside her, looking out at the same view. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" Rachel put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "How could I regret anything that led to you and Ethan?" Together they stood in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, looking out at a world that had once been hostile but now lay at their feet, not conquered, but embraced as part of a journey that had only just begun. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen